there are coping mechanisms at play.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when we strip away our coping mechanisms? What happens when two people know each other's coping strategies, or they want to talk about them and they want to get them out of the way, and then we're in this new place of no coping mechanism, and now we're just in this new place dealing with the world and all the energy in it. When you become raw, and then you're out in the world, and we're with one another, but then we go into a world and we meet other people, other personality, other frameworks, and what we're noticing is that it enters us. And this is something I think we are only now starting to really get a taste for. I think this is happening all the time. People are picking up other people's energies most of the time. They just don't know that that's happening. So why do people get burnout? Or why are situations at work so toxic? Or what's all this stuff? There's traumas playing out. There's all these things playing out. But we're so normalized and numb to them that it's only when you are two people like us that are brought together or interested in things that we're interested in learning about that we actually start to notice the processes themselves and the patterns that we're in, and oh my gosh, I'm doing that thing again, or I feel my body, that same spot is being triggered again after having this conversation, whatever it is. We're just in a constant state of noticing, which might sound a little bit like consumed.
I think that could sound exhausting. If I was to tell that to, people that I know, people in my family or whatever, who are completely outside of these frames of understanding, that would sound exhausting.
It is exhausting sometimes. I think we're getting better. It's we're training for something. The reason why we have all of these outlets is because I feel what it is that we are stretching, what is working itself on us, and what we are working with here. We don't always fully understand the process that we're in. Sometimes it can be taxing. That's just the truth. And so that could also be due in part where we are in this time in the world right now. There's a lot of forces at play, a lot of forces at work here in society, and we're in it. We're in a freaking soup of deep contradiction and complexity and tuning in to the destabilization can be destabilizing. So, not noticing it, which is a lot of, I would say many people are not aware of what's influencing them or what they're being influenced by. There are coping mechanisms at play. Mm-hmm. What happens when we strip away our coping mechanisms? What happens when two people know each other's coping strategies, or they want to talk about them and they want to get them out of the way, and then we're in this new place of no coping mechanism, and now we're just in this new place dealing with the world and all the energy in it. And it's I think that's a little bit of where we are right now. You and I, personally speaking.
Those hard times that occur, especially if both partners are in intense process, or there's sort of forces coming in from all sides at the same time. The reason that we do experience that at all is partly coming from the commitment to noticing and the long process of stripping back the dissociatives. We don't just retreat from the situation into addictive or dissociative mechanisms, phones, television, etc., alcohol. We do the difficulty of feeling it when it's happening, but you don't just dwell on it. We're not just helplessly depressed. We try and notice that, communicate about it, and as artists, we try and create from it.
Yes.
If I'm feeling shit, pick up the guitar and make beautiful music about the feeling of feeling shit, and then listen to it back, and maybe that actually is something that breaks me out. And that it's not about the guitar per se, although music is fundamental to life. Those things are practices and channels, and we have an ecology around us of them that's growing, right? And we feel into new ones all the time. And that, I think, is, Jordan Peterson's clean up your room maybe is the low resolution, and we've moved to cultivating your garden. Right? And this, you want to have a rich and diverse ecology which is in communication with one another. When we create stuff, it feeds back on us, right? Circling back to H. You were going through hard times, not noticing it, but these songs you were writing were messages to you from yourself, from your higher self. My discourses and conversations and the insights I have, very often I haven't fully internalized them. So I have a great dialogos, and then a couple of months later, I live out that situation, and that's when I finally get sort of come to terms with it.
Totally. And I'm glad that you pointed out that we don't dwell in the space, but we do have to sink into it. So there is a balance, right? There's a balance, and there's also a boundary of realizing when we are in a state of heightened awareness or heightened sensitivity, we still are in relation to one another to make sure that we are loving one another and reminding each other of who we really are. We want to be able to carry each other through these modes that can sort of, enter a lot of different states. And no, there's not a dwelling in, but we do sink in, and we are deeply committed to this process. And it's beautiful. It's a practice. We are practicing this. This is the practice. How do we sink in to what is? And when we actually become more aware, and we don't go to a place of numbing or turning off or tuning out, what happens? There's a lot of noticing there, and then we get to bring the paintbrush out, like you said before, and paint different possibilities.
from a place of grounding in the reality.
Yeah.
From a place of, I am suffering, or I am living out of this story, or I keep doing this. And like really like letting that get right down to the bottom. That's the grounding, right? But from that place of ground, still you take the capacity to communicate and reflect, and it doesn't become an enclosing ground.
It only does when we resist it.
Right.
It only does when we try to make it go away, and when we're not enclosing it to one another, that we're in a certain state. When we don't enclose, and when we disclose, when we don't disclose it, when we don't present what is present, then it's almost like we ping pong the thing to one another until we both have to realize what's really going on here. It's
and to think there are marriages and lives lived where we never get to what's really going on here, and to attempt to speak to what's really going on here is to risk, ultimately. Like, it's to risk, like there's almost a fork in the road. Like, once you take that step towards honesty and communication, that relationship might not be, like, the other person might not be able to come with you. They might not be at the same stage as you. But fuck, like, you gotta face that choice. Am I going to take the risk to be truthful, or am I going to stay at the level that has been set, you know, when I started this relationship 5-6 years ago or whatever,
or 40 years ago,
or 40 years ago. These are difficult things, and I think with like having faith, having a deeper grounding, having a sense of like somewhere I can turn back to that is deeper than all of these things, is what allows you to and guides you through adhering to that path.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Matrix. It's like, you know, you can't necessarily unsee it once you see it. Like, once you get a glimpse, you can't unglimpse it. It's just a matter of like, do you follow the call of that next step, that next move forward, that next question? Usually it will be something like your emotions will be speaking to you, really letting you know that there's some deep disconnection that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And if you don't address it, you could end up getting sick.
Yes. Either you cut everything out and you become, you know, one of the zombies that constitutes our zombie culture, or you get sick, or both. But this is not a mystery anymore. There are books and scientific papers, and we know now that not listening to your emotional information, blocking out important information coming from in the body chronically over years and years is, I believe, what gives rise to perhaps all or a large body of the illnesses that we suffer, autoimmune diseases, cancers. Many of these things, when you inquire deeply into the context, you will find there was something deeply energetically imbalanced with this person for a long time, that they lived out of this fragmentation, and the body keeps count, but also like the richness of life keeps count, and the you can't deeply connect. You can't have these fruitful experiences if you don't take those risks. And I think a part of like showing up in community and showing up with other people in group context, where this is part of the intention, like we're going to show up as we are, what you begin to realize is I can be really depressed and down, and just being honest about that with other people creates a thing which is sort of affirming and sustaining and possibly insight giving. That's the only way to practice what we're practicing here, is to come as you are and get better at doing it. You gotta start from somewhere, and it's gonna be messy. If you haven't, wherever you're starting from, it's probably gonna be messy, but the pathway is to that deeper listening and seeing those patterns and growing through this process, listening for the person that your partner is becoming, listening for who your parent or your family member or like whoever it is, people close to you that have been a certain way for a long time, to listen to all those pieces. And of course, to listen to those, you have to have gotten in and out your own trauma that's blocking you from even seeing that. But once you get there, what's the possibility here? How can I become an agent and a channel of possibility and love?